good afternoon or good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us. My name is Roxana Wanar. I am a Ukraine and human rights activist, community leader, and organizer of events. I am also the initiator and main organizer of this event and of our Ukraine Advocacy Task Force of DC that is putting on this lovely event for you today. The Ukraine Advocacy Task Force of DC is a grassroots group of volunteers and activists based in the National Capital Region of the United States. We are focused on public education, policy engagement related to Ukraine's sovereignty, democratic governance, and human rights. Our team includes volunteer activists who are Ukrainian Americans, Americans, supporters of Ukraine, U.S. military veterans, and anti-Putin, anti-war Russian dissidents who are pro-Ukraine, pro-democracy, and pro-human rights. I spent a lot of countless hours and sleepless nights in making this event happen. It was a labor of love on my part, but I couldn't have done it without the help of my incredible team. I want to take the time to thank my hardworking team, especially those who helped me the most for this event. Mr. Eric Gonzalez, who is our IT director, thanks so much for your hard work on building and running this Zoom meeting and website for us. Mr. Eugene Chu, who became one of our main editors for this event, thanks for all of your help. Maria Panga, who also was another editor for this event, thanks for all of your help as well. I also want to thank Marina Lvovska and Olya Onishenko for their time and support with this event. Last but not least, we had incredible advisors, Dr. Michael O'Hurley. We couldn't have done this event without you and your guidance and support. Thank you. And Pastor Roman Capran, thanks for all of your guidance and support as we did this last-minute event. You're probably wondering, well, why are we gathering here today? This is happening last minute as the American and Ukrainian American community of the DC area only recently found out that the supporters of the Russian Orthodox Church, the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia, Rokor, and the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate, or the UOCMP, are doing an advocacy event and press conference today, December 16, 2025, here in Washington, D.C., in Congress, on Capitol Hill, to spread lies and disinformation against Ukraine, the Ukrainian government, and their perceived so-called religious persecution of Orthodox Christians in Ukraine, specifically the UOCMP. And to counter their event, we organized this virtual press conference with an excellent panel of experts who have done tremendous research and work throughout the years on this topic and topics related to this to present the facts, the truth about what is really going on. I want to thank each expert with us today for taking the time out of their busy schedules to be with us for this important event. A big thank you to all of the journalists and guests we have here with us as well. It is my honor and pleasure to start by introducing our wonderful moderator, Dr. Michael O'Hurley. He is a journalist and author. His latest work, written with his co-author Oksana Shadrina, Wolves in Sheep's Clothing, The Russian Orthodox Church's Threat to European Security and Democracy, published by Ibidim and Columbia University Press, has just hit bookshelves, as well as Amazon and other booksellers. He is a frequent presenter and panelist on topics such as diplomacy to politics and the church to sociology. Welcome, Dr. Hurley, and thank you.
Thank you to everybody who's helped put this event together. Good afternoon from Washington, D.C. Good evening here in Europe. And to people around the world, welcome. Today we're going to be talking about faith and freedom, opposing Moscow's false narrative. As Roxana said in her introduction, there are people on Capitol Hill, and 2 weeks ago visited the White House, promoting a narrative that Ukraine doesn't respect religious freedom and that they are being subjected to religious persecution. We're going to look at that tonight with some stellar presenters. From our panel, we have people from law, civil society, theology, the academy, activist, and journalist. I think you'll enjoy the discussion. We're going to start with Victor Rudd. Now, Victor is a lawyer with over 40 years of experience. I could go on and on, but we have a large panel, so short on time. But let me just say that he's one of the most in-demand speakers. If you've read anything in publications, whether it's The Hill, Forbes, the Kyiv Post, or EU Today, you will see Victor's work. Victor, can you help us with your opening statement, please?
Sure. Thank you very much, Doctor, and thanks, of course, to all the organizers. Let me read to you very quickly a statement from official Kremlin television from a couple of years ago to introduce the subject. And it goes like this. This is a loose translation. There isn't a single country in the world that is as easily manipulated as America. We can take them down without nukes. So let me give you a little context for that and how it meshes with the issues we're going to be discussing this afternoon. Make America Great Again, for those of you old enough to remember, was President Reagan's 1980 campaign slogan. And when Ukraine renewed its independence in 1991, that was the final blow to the Soviet Union and imploded, and in fact, made America great again. We became number one in the world. We won the Cold War, and we were as close to being supreme in the world as we were after World War II, given, of course, the other intervening circumstances. It stopped $13 trillion that was being spent on the Cold War, and that's in 1996 dollars. Putin's response was to say it was the greatest tragedy of the 20th century, the implosion of the USSR. The result was a blueprint to take down the United States using Ukraine as the fulcrum, as the pivot point. And it was in very large measure based on an information war that they called it. Minister Shoigu, Defense Minister Shoigu, put it this way: the information war requires undermining America's political, economic, and social system, mass indoctrination of the population for destabilizing society and forcing America to make decisions in our interest. We're going to be talking about one element of that today, and to show you how gross and extreme the situation is. The Russian Church issued wallet cards to Russian troops during the February expanded invasion of Ukraine in 2022. It was short and sweet. Your mission is to erase the Ukrainian nation off the face of the earth. It's a holy war. That's the Russian Orthodox Church, so-called church. State television talks about Ukrainians needing to be burned, their throats slit. There must be genocide of those cretins. So what does that all mean now? Well, we're talking about reality reversal. You'll be hearing more about this, where there's an accusation levied against the victim of doing to the criminal what the criminal does to the victim. And it's ironic that President Reagan's so-called evil empire speech, you may remember that, was given before the National Association of Evangelicals, because it's precisely the American religious right that in large measure has become enamored of Russia and Putin. And in the process, unfortunately, if only tangentially, there is the facilitation, the enabling precisely of genocide that is verbalized as such by Russia and, bitterly enough, by the so-called Russian Church. I'll end it at that. We'll get into more details with the other speakers and hopefully flesh it out with the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Victor, thank you very much. I want to follow up on 2 points you made. You talked about $13.1 trillion. Now, that's 25, 30 years ago. What has happened
today?
What has happened to that peace dividend, given Russia's aggression in Moldova, in Georgia, in Ukraine now, their current threats to Europe, including a hybrid warfare where there's hardly a bank or a tech company or a government in Europe that doesn't get attacked with cyber espionage on a daily basis. What is going to happen to the American budget because of Putin's aggression?
Well, it depends on the reaction, primarily, of course, from Trump and how Congress is going to get into that issue, which they should. That peace dividend is long gone. Unfortunately, generally speaking, we have promoted a new nuclear doctrine, and that is submission, intimidation, paralysis to nuclear intimidation in place of what we had and what served us well, which was mutual deterrence. That's gone. We're going to see a global race for nuclear arms by every country that doesn't have it. Ukraine surrendered its own nuclear arms, as you know. We were hectored to do it by the United States. The U.S. then eliminated most of Ukraine's conventional weaponry. And it is, as always, a late awakening. General MacArthur said you can summarize war with two words: too late to understand the enemy and too late to do something about it. We are repeating that here again. It will be potentially, it can be cataclysmic. I've spoken and written about this a lot, but that's just a summary answer.
Victor, I know you're a lawyer with years of experience. Your insights are always very keen. I want to talk about the point you made about the victims being blamed. We've gone from before the 2014 invasion of Ukraine and the 2022 full-scale invasion. Russia was consistently criticized by the United States, both Republican and Democratic administrations, for the lack of religious freedom, freedom of the press, civil society freedom, the decay of democracy. What is your thought now as to how these very people are now on Capitol Hill wagging their fingers at the US and Ukraine over religious freedom? Uh, what has happened that they now command the narrative, false though it is?
Well, I can speculate, but it's not entirely speculation off the top of my head. We have seen, of course, a 180-degree pivot by the administration. There were indicia of it in Trump's first term. I have a pretty good sense for how, let's say, intimidation, recruitment, influence, and the like works, how it's imposed by Russia on Western leaders. I do not know for sure, but it is my fear that our president has been compromised somehow, because the position, the consistency, the longevity, almost the unshakable path that the president has taken has always been on Russia's side. And the fact that we have now have a new G7, so to speak, conglomeration of countries. It's the abandonment of Europe and the United States joining now at the UN and in other fora with Russia, North Korea, China, Iran, and other sterling democracies. The flip has been absolutely total. If you were to read our revised so-called national security strategy that came out a month ago, if you were to put it next to page by page, which I have done, put it next to what I refer to as the blueprint to take America down, that was actually promulgated in 1997, 3 years before Putin, when the United States was pouring billions of dollars into Russia. That blueprint, required reading for the General Staff Academy of the Russian military, I can take words out almost literally from that blueprint and transpose them into our national security strategy. It is that close and it is that literal in many, many, many instances. It is a stunning parallel. And the question is, what are we going to do about it? What's Congress going to do about it? We had a law, for example, signed by Trump in 2017 that territorial acquisitions by Russia in Ukraine would never be recognized. Well, it's the flip side now. The biggest problem we have, Doctor, is we are framing this as a Ukraine issue. It's not. Ukraine is being used as a crowbar. It's not a territorial issue. Russia is the largest country in the world. Its equator would span around the world 1.5 times. It occupies a third of Asia, 40% of Europe. Turkey and India would fit in the European part, and Iran, Afghanistan, and Iraq would fit into a part of a sub-region in Russia. They don't need another 0.02% of territory. So we have real estate moguls doing a real estate deal, not understanding that real estate is not the issue. Every single issue in the so-called peace agreement has been addressed 100 times in 100 agreements in the last 80 years. Every single one has been breached multiple times, and we're doing it again. We are courting, sooner or later, the bubble is going to pop. And I am deathly afraid that we are not at all prepared for it. And Europe is only beginning to see the glimmer of the reality.
Victor, thank you for your insights. And for those of you who haven't read the National Security Blueprint, it's available online. I suggest you do read it. It's in plain English. And one of the startling things that Victor alluded to that I picked up on immediately was that it's very critical of Europe and Europe's civilization, of Ukraine and freedom, but there's not a single word about the diminishing freedoms of Russia, China, North Korea, or any of the regimes that we used to normally point out as lacking in civil society virtues. I want to talk now with Sister Vasa Laren. Sister comes from a different tradition than the law. She's devoted her life to peace, to the church, to the reconciliation of humanity. She's an Orthodox Christian Rhizophore nun, a liturgical professor of practical theology in the Kiev Orthodox Theological Academy. She's written articles that really are fascinating on Byzantine liturgy. But the one that caught me most recently was her lecture at Jesus College at Cambridge, where she talks about freedom and authoritarianism. I think it was insightful. It's available. I suggest you go look at that. You probably know her from her Monday Morning Coffee and Coffee with Sister Vasa podcast, where she reaches people throughout the world. Sister Vasa, welcome.
Thank you so much, Michael, and to everybody that made this online press conference possible. So I, as well as the others gathered here, have been disturbed both by that national security strategy that's entitled, or the subtitle says November of this year, but somehow it was published, I think, on a Thursday in December. And I've also been disturbed by a certain church organization in which I was born and raised back in the United States, but now I live already for over half my life in Europe. Presently, I live in Vienna, Austria, and I've been disturbed by the church jurisdiction that's called the Russian Orthodox Church abroad, or the Russian Orthodox Church outside Russia. It's based in New York City and is affiliated with the Moscow Patriarchate in Moscow. This church has been lobbying on Capitol Hill for the allegedly persecuted Ukrainian Orthodox Church. And this narrative that has already been mentioned, that there is this Orthodox Church being persecuted by the Ukrainian administration of President Zelensky, this narrative is clearly trying to discredit President Zelensky, especially, and his administration in Washington, especially, in order to present that government as somehow not being interested in the values that we cherish in the West, including religious freedom. Now, the Orthodox Church in the United States that's lobbying for something that is dear to the heart, if we'll use, for lack of a better term, the heart of President Putin, that has as one of his terms for a ceasefire repeatedly demanded that the restrictions be taken off of that particular church jurisdiction in Ukraine. See, that church jurisdiction somehow is important to the Kremlin because for those of us who have inhabited somehow the space that is Russian Orthodoxy, either abroad or within Russia, we know that the Kremlin propaganda machine and geopolitical various aspirations are promulgated through church structures, various church structures that are available outside Russia, including those obvious ones that somehow are tied to Russian Orthodoxy. Okay, thank you. And so when recently there was this lobbying on Capitol Hill, meetings with Representative Luna and some others, led by the Russian Orthodox Church outside Russia and its very first hierarch, to present the narrative that we are, trying to defend persecuted church, I, from my bell tower, recognize a certain influence that is coming from Moscow, that is encouraging, for various reasons, these church organizations, including the ROKOR, to try to discredit the Ukrainian government so as to discourage American aid, and especially military aid, to that Ukrainian government's resistance against the onslaught of its hostile, aggressive neighbor. So I've been disturbed as an Orthodox Christian in seeing also the aggressor being helped by Christians that might either not realize or consciously, realize that they should be somehow helping the forces that are against democracy and against freedom and all of that. I feel like people should be aware that we should get on the right side of history and defend the good kind of American internationalism that's traditional. That's it for me. Thank you.
Sister, thank you very much. Sister, I want to follow up on that for a minute because you have an interesting background, having been raised within the Russian Orthodox tradition. The Russian Orthodox Church in the United States really rose up, if I understand my history correctly, and I believe I do, in opposition to the persecution of the Russian Orthodox Church by the Bolsheviks and later the communist regimes. What has happened that ROKOR has come from a perspective of opposing illiberalism to now being a proponent of illiberalism, where the rights of individuals seem to be unimportant and where the power and authority of the church seems to be a guiding principle? What happened? What are your thoughts on that subject?
Thank you. So that's a very good question. And the thing is that this organization, specifically the Russian Orthodox Church outside Russia, based in New York City, in 2007, unified with the Moscow Patriarchate, right? So before, in the Cold War years, when I was raised in this church jurisdiction, we were separate from them and very much this dissident voice and criticizing the collaboration that was happening between the church structure in Moscow and the hostile, atheist state authorities. But in 2007, in May of 2007, when the union or reunification, as they were calling it, happened with the Moscow Church, there was an agreement signed that all of the bishops and candidates to the episcopacy in the church abroad had to be approved by Moscow. So also the first hierarch, Metropolitan Nicholas Olhovsky, who leads the ROKOR today, was approved by Moscow back when he was elected, both when he was made bishop, because that was after the union, so he had to get a stamp of approval from Moscow. So the whole church leadership has to be approved by Moscow, and I think that I don't know to what extent it is a conscious or a kind of, I would not speak of agents of the FSB formally, but I would speak, excuse me, for anyone who considers this disrespectful, I would speak of what Lenin called useful idiots in in Western countries that might be bamboozled, not really knowing who they're dealing with, I don't know if that's what we're dealing with in the White House as well, how much, there's an ongoing discussion of whether these are useful idiots or are these formerly, agents. But these are people who are influenced and in the favor somehow of Moscow, who have their stamp of approval and who have partly to be grateful to Moscow for their position of authority.
Well, Sister, I want to follow up very briefly. What I find interesting is it's antithetical to American history. During the American Revolution, the Church of England, its pastors, had to take an oath not only to the church, but to the head of the church, who was the king. The very king who was waging war on the American people, who was diminishing their civil liberties, who was forcing them to board and feed British soldiers, who taxed them without representation. The Americans fought against this, and they didn't interfere with the faith or the theology of the Church of England. They simply said, we're going to have the Episcopal Church. It's the same theology. It's the same philosophy. It's the same traditions without the political influence from our enemy. How is it that ROCOR is taking a position that opposes that American tradition of distancing foreign powers from controlling religious entities in the United States? What do you ascribe that to?
I ascribe that to, I think, a kind of perspective that's influenced in the United States, I think, by the narrative that traditional values or family values, that whole family values crowd seems to think that somehow Russia and Putin stand for family values because they do, official like gay bashing and, transgender bashing, and they throw out these mainly for external consumption kinds of narratives that appeal not only to people like, aging Orthodox bishops in the West, but also, to Christians of other stripes. You might know this, right? So they seem to think that they're on the side, I don't know, of traditional values. Then nothing could be farther from the truth when you talk about the Putin so-called elite and Putin himself. But these are often people who don't know very well the reality of the Putin regime.
Well, Sister, I think you hit the nail on the head. We've seen, since Putin's been in power, summary executions. We've seen murders. We've seen him use chemical warfare against innocent people in the UK. People get thrown out of buildings. Children are kidnapped from Ukraine. People are assassinated in parks in Germany. There's rape. I was at Bucha. I was there in the mass grave.
I was there as well. Yes.
So the idea that Russia is the defender of traditional Christian values, I would find to be a very troubling idea.
And it's very important. Yeah, it's important, Michael, to notice all the time how they never say anything. These lobbyists that come to Capitol Hill, they're allegedly concerned with this, these supposed persecutions of this still canonically affiliated with Moscow church jurisdiction in Ukraine, but they never seem to say anything about the increasing and, as we speak, ever escalating targeting of civilians in Ukraine and the constant bombardment of the civilian infrastructure and all of that. Or Bucha or any of that. There's no statement explicitly, that states from the ROCOR, from this church jurisdiction, no statement since the war began about any of these war crimes, not about Bucha, not about the kidnapping of tens of thousands at this point of Ukrainian children, the rapes, all of that stuff. There's none of that, not a single time. But there are repeated statements, I counted them, there are at least 9 of them, explicitly about the alleged persecutions of a specific church jurisdiction. So I would like people to just pay attention to that. Thanks.
Very good point. I think we should take a look with our eyes instead of listening to their words. There's a a real dichotomy between them. I want to go now to someone who has a very interesting perspective, Pastor Roman Kapran. Pastor Roman was a veteran of the Soviet military. He was baptized in 1988, graduated from the Odessa Theological Seminary and the Biblical Theological Seminary in Pennsylvania. He's a resident in the United States. He served as president of the Ukrainian Baptist Convention in the United States, and he's the chief editor of the Ukrainian Study Bible, and he's published several other works. He brings an interesting perspective. It's not just about orthodoxy, it's about Christianity. He comes from a Protestant perspective. So, Pastor Roman, welcome. Can we hear from you tonight?
Yeah, thank you for invitation. I want to open my statement saying Putin and Russia must be stopped. I was born in the Soviet Union. I attended Soviet Union school. I was in the Soviet Union army. I know about Russia not from TV or books, but from my experience. I understand Russian language and logic very well because I live half of my life under Russian government. I believe I have right to speak on this topic. In the United States and the West, the media very often repeats the thought that the war in Ukraine is a conflict between Russia and Ukraine. I want to show that it's just part of a picture. Many people in United States and the West would be surprised to know how Russians themselves talk about this war. In Moscow, last year, in March, Kirill, the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, issued document at a council held in a Central Orthodox Church in Moscow. This document clearly declares the purpose of the war. The document called The Present and Future Russian World. I want to read two sentences from this document. The special military operation is a new stage in a national liberation struggle of the Russian people against the criminal Kiev regime and a collective West behind it. From the spiritual and moral point of view, the special military operation is a holy war in which Russia and its people defending the single spiritual space of Holy Rus.
1 minute left.
The mission of restrainer, protecting the world from the onslaught of globalism and victory of the West, which has fallen in Satanism. I would like to draw your attention to the role of the Russian Orthodox Church in this war. First, Russian Orthodox Church is a part of Russian military machine. Kirill, as the head of Russian Orthodox Church, called this war holy war against satanic West. As a result, we have almost 700 churches destroyed, 79 priests and pastors killed. It's a proof, but that we can prove, but number can be more. 1,000 tortured because of Russian Orthodox Church blessed this holy war. Second, it's an old Russian trick to use Russian Orthodox Church as a soft power. Russia commits many war crimes in Ukraine. The Russian authorities persecute Ukrainian Christians in occupied territories of Ukraine. Therefore, the Russian Orthodox Church, to divert attention in the West from Russian crimes, speaking of persecution in Ukraine. Third, Russia is using as a salami method. Ukraine is the first stage, then the Baltic countries. But the main goal of Russia and Putin is the West and the United States. The Russian Orthodox Church is going to United States to find supporters and split people in a government and American community whereby weaken support of Ukrainian now. Russia was lost the Cold War to the United States and West in 1991. after which the USSR collapsed. Now Russia wants to take revenge and overpower the United States. So Russia used Russian Orthodox Church as a Trojan horse in the United States. We inform the United States government, do not trust, and people too, don't trust and believe people who represent Russian Orthodox Church. And I want to close my statements saying we need to stop Russia and Putin. Thank you.
Pastor Roman, from your personal experience, it's very powerful. I want to talk about almost 700 houses of worship, Catholic, Evangelical, Baptist, Protestant, Greek, Ukrainian Greek Catholic, across the panoply, synagogues, and houses of worship of the Crimean Tatars. They've been destroyed. In an age where, and you know, having been a military man yourself, of laser guided weapons, drones that can hit with great accuracy, do you think that the destruction of these houses of worship is an accident of war, or do you think it's part of the plan?
It's a part of plan, genocidal plan of Russia. They want to eliminate everything, destroy everything. When we see pictures right now of Ukrainian cities in a Donbass, it's a total disaster. They specifically targeted evangelical churches and other churches, because church, it's a community where people gather together and worship. They have communications. In the Soviet Union, communists targeted specifically Christians. Why? Because Christians have communications, they gather together once a week, and it's a strong society. And communists and Russia right now, they targeted Christians because it's a strong community. It's not like a random occasion war accident. No, they destroyed everything.
There's over 20 different faith organizations represented in the Ukrainian Council of Churches and Faith Communities. Why is it that the Russian Orthodox Church is here only talking about the Ukrainian Orthodox Moscow Patriarchate? Do Christian communities in Russia and occupied territories, do you have the freedom to worship?
In Ukraine, it's a freedom for everybody, for all churches. Some people from Orthodox Church, Ukrainian or so-called Ukrainian Orthodox Church, they link to Russian Orthodox Church and their KGB before and now as a FSB agent. Ukrainian government doesn't persecute priests or pastors. Why it's connecting to Ukrainian Orthodox Church? Because they called Ukrainian Orthodox Church right now, but it's an affiliation or part of Russian Orthodox Church. Before, can you imagine? Russia, it's a huge country, and Ukraine, it's a much smaller. 12,000 churches were in Russia, and it's the same amount, 12,000 churches of Russian Orthodox Church was in Ukraine. Can you imagine size of Ukraine and Russia, but the same amount of churches? And for Russia, it's a last point, it's a last like a hook to hold in Ukraine, Russian Orthodox Church. And many, I don't want to lecture for many things, but I know a lot of people know. Before, in a Soviet Union time, many Orthodox priests were connected or agent of KGB. At the same time, right now, a lot of Orthodox priests there are agents of FSB, and Ukraine needs to stop that people. It's the same situation you mentioned before or during the revolution, because many priests, they connected to England.
It's a very similar situation. Last question, very briefly. We talk about freedom and persecution. In Russia, can a Baptist church worship and bring over missionaries and gather their membership freely, or are they under government supervision?
It's under government supervision. It was the same situation during the Soviet Union era. In general, it was good. They communist government or Russian government or Soviet Union government, they proclaim we have a freedom. But in real life, a lot of Christians were persecuted, a lot of Christians were jailed, and right now, all missionaries banned from Russia in the beginning of 20s. In 90s, a lot of missionaries came to Russia, and early in 2000, a lot of missionaries left Russia. And right now, still in Ukraine, a lot of missionaries still live in Ukraine because they came in 90s and still live in Ukraine. Ukraine has a freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom for everybody to worship. Different situation in Russia.
So again, we have the situation that Victor began with, that the victims are actually being blamed for being the persecutors, as opposed to the persecutors being held responsible for their acts.
Sure.
Pastor Roman, thank you. And let me just say, I was in Donbass, Bakhmut in December 2022, and we were witnesses to a Baptist who was murdered for his religious activity. So I hope you, your colleagues and friends, continue to be safe and you stay in contact. And let's hope that real religious freedom returns to all of Ukraine and that the occupied territories are restored. I want to go now to Steve Lacey. Steve is a distinguished ex-strategist, a commercial anthropologist. He's one of Europe's foremost experts in qualitative research. And he's a partner of the counter disinformation NGO Resilience and Reconstruction. One of the things that I like to say when I talk about Steve is that he was awarded essentially the highest honor that his discipline offers. It's known as the Oscars for researchers. So, Steve, welcome. And I'm really interested to hear your perspective.
Thank you very much. So mine's very much a personal perspective. And as you mentioned, Michael, I'm a leading strategist. I do a lot of behavioral change campaigns. I understand advertising really, really well. That's my craft and my understanding. But I was radicalized by the Russian Orthodox Church, and I was radicalized for 16 years by the Russian Orthodox Church. And I'm going to talk quite quickly because I'm going to talk 16 years in kind of beats. This isn't a victim narrative because the victims are the people of Ukraine that are having a genocide, cultural side, linguicide, and ecocide unleashed on them. But it is very dark to go back because essentially I'm going to a very, very dark space and it strips me of my identity. And as I mentioned, I was essentially radicalized and I speak out as a warning to others. So I'll tell you the journey very quickly. So it started on a school trip when I was 18. I went to Russia, fell in love with kind of the mysticalness of Russia and kind of Dostoevsky, and thought it was this mystical place. And I thought, this is really attractive. It's different to the West. I want to kind of go back and kind of visit more. So I used to go back to Russia kind of regularly. I also used to go there to kind of party a lot, to be honest. And one day, my mum had died, and they say that radicalization, misery attracts company, and I think that that's very, very true. And one day I saw a kind of monastery in St. Petersburg, and I thought I'm going to kind of visit and have a look. And I was really kind of hungover, and I visit there, and I felt I had an experience, and my mum was telling me that I had to kind of change my life. So I kind of walked out there believing something different. But I'm also disabled, so I've got a lobster hand, and I realised the negative attitudes in Russia towards disability were really kind of strong. So I wanted to change kind of opinion. So I was like, what do I do? So, oh, sorry. So I joined the Russian Orthodox Church, and very quickly I was kind of brainwashed by the kind of narratives that Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia are kind of one nation, kind of third Rome. The West is in decline. The West wants to destroy orthodoxy. The West wants to destroy Russia. By 2014, I was completely and utterly radicalized, and I believed every narrative that Russia pushes about Ukraine. This Ukraine fall, it's a coup. Lots of other things. The Russian language is being suppressed. So I was completely utterly brainwashed. My media essentially was Graham Phillips and RT and the Russian kind of church. And by that stage, I was in a really dark state. I can tell you the journey out, but if that's interesting, very quickly. So I ended up becoming a troll, essentially, a keyboard warrior. I trolled multiple kind of journalists in the UK that were very kind of pro kind of Ukraine, and there's one famous one called Edward Lucas, and he said, I've had enough of you, I want to debate you. So I said to him, okay, I'll have a debate with you, because I was so convinced that what the Russian Orthodox Church had told me was true. I met up with him, but one of the things about debating is you have to learn the other side. So I started reading his books and other people that I kind of trolled, such as Luke Harding, and I was like, now I'm really confused about what the truth is. So I said, I pulled out of the debate, and at that point, I kind of said, right, I don't know what the truth is anymore. I just want to stay with the kind of church. And the interesting point there, and I think this is really interesting, is Putin didn't want me to be that useful idiot. He just wanted me to think there's no truth.
That is one of the problems with disinformation. People turn off from seeking the truth because they can no longer distinguish it, which leads me to my question that maybe you can give me some insight, Steve.
Yep.
Almost 10,000 children were forcibly removed from Ukraine and taken to Russia.
Yep.
While in Russia, almost 2/3 of them were housed in residential programs, sports facilities, and seminaries belonging to the Russian Orthodox Church.
Yep.
What role do you think the Russian Orthodox Church plays in co-opting those children to believe that Russia is their savior because they're supposedly advocates of traditional values, as opposed to allowing those children to develop normally with respect to their real culture, their language, their history? You've been inside the Russian
Yep.
church. Tell me what happens. What would you expect to be happening with these children?
What will be happening with the children is they will be told all those myths that we're one nation, we come from the same kind of baptism, the West wants to kind of destroy us, how powerful the Third Rome, that Russia's mighty and it's the right place for kind of God, through to the extremes where, as we know, teenagers have been asked to fight against their own country. So that's how dangerous. And I know this because I used to go to St. Elizabeth's Monastery in Minsk, and that's a hotbed, and they're actually training Belarusian children with guns, right? They're brainwashing them, and that's it. I saw how their school operates. It's all the myths and the lies of the propaganda that they will be propagating through.
You know, one of the things that we talked about in our new book was how the West views Russian history. Most people don't know about the Principality of Muscovy, that the idea of Russia is really relatively new, right before the American Revolution. That the Russian history that the West adopted in the 30s, 40s, 50s, during the Cold War,
Mm-hmm.
was really taught as a bulwark against communism, even though it lacked in truth. Do you think that those educators in the 1950s who said that what we're teaching about Russia is fundamentally wrong, we know it to be wrong, but it's what's approved in the curriculum? Do you think the Western historical mythos about Russia makes us more vulnerable to embracing the disinformation campaign that they are the defenders of Christian values?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and I think that's kind of built in. You taught Russian history in the UK, for instance, but it's taught through a kind of certain kind of lens, and you see it, and it's the thing I keep saying. A lot of when the big war kind of happened, a lot of the academics they were weeding out were people that are Russian experts, not Ukrainian, right? You need to amplify the Ukrainian voices that understand what is happening. From a public perspective, so we just done a lot of public research. Public know very, very little. So they didn't even really know about Bucha. They didn't really know about Mariupol. What really surprised them was the 19,000 children being kidnapped. That was the big thing that kind of really kind of jolted their kind of opinion. And Russia propaganda knows that. So it understands the news cycle. It knew at the beginning of the war that actually that's not a time for the trolls to operate. It was waiting for the news to decline, and then it hit it really hard with its trolls, and that's how it's operating. And the Russian Orthodox Church is a Trojan horse, as someone describes it. It's a bedrock rock, and it will radicalize. If this was other groups, they'd be really picked up. It's a radicalization hotbed and a cult.
Thank you very much. I want to now go to Father Yuri. Father Kozlovsky is a priest of the Philadelphia Eparchy of the Ukrainian Catholic Church. He serves as the director of the St. Gabriel Institute in Washington, D.C., which is accredited by the Ukrainian Catholic University. If you haven't met Father Yuri, you will see him and his students up on Capitol Hill engaging with diplomats and policymakers. Before moving to the United States, he was the director of the Collegium at the Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv. He was educated in Rome. Father, thank you for joining us. I would like to hear your perspective. Tell me about freedom and faith and what's going on between Russia and Ukraine today.
Well, thank you, Dr. Hurley, and special thanks to the organizers for bringing us together today. This is very important in times of lies and propaganda to speak of truth and proper analysis of the situation. Well, allow me to speak today, as a pastor of a church, Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, that has lived through persecution, occupation, forced liquidation under Soviet rule specifically, and I also was born in Soviet Union and lived part of my life, 17 years in Soviet Union before it collapsed. And as member of this church, and I've been a member of this church since birth, we know very well from experience the difference between authentic religious freedom and religion used as an instrument of state power and control. My church was underground when I was born and when I was raised, but in a way it was free in its spirit, and this helped it survive even the fierce persecution. While the Russian church was permitted but infiltrated and made into a tool of Soviet propaganda, which I think, in my view, destroyed it so much more than what they were able to do to my church. What is happening now in Washington is really not a debate about theology or worship. Everybody pretty much, I hope, understands that Ukraine is not banning Christianity, orthodoxy, or religious practices or beliefs. And the numbers in our number here and representations of so many churches, so many denominations speaks very loudly about this. Ukraine remains bound by European human rights law and continues to guarantee the freedom of religion, and I think very successfully in a unique way. This is really about something else. It's about foreign religion institution, the Russian Orthodox Church, that has publicly blasted the war of aggression and justified mass violence in spiritual terms. Claims of religious persecution are familiar Kremlin narrative, which is now being repacked and represented for Western audiences, and especially to US policymakers, in order basically to weaken support for Ukraine. And I think this goal is very important. As a Catholic priest, I want to be clear, that religious freedom protects faith from the state. It does not protect the state when it hides behind faith. And this is very important to understand in this discussion. Ukraine's action addresses collaboration with foreign entities that have foreign control and national security threats. This is what the situation is about in Ukraine. Not prayer, not sacraments, not beliefs. Meanwhile, the real religious persecution is bluntly occurring in Russian occupied territories. We've heard the numbers just before from Pastor. So many churches destroyed, clergy are killed, and two of our priests were imprisoned in Russia. And after their release, it was just horrible to hear of the experiences they had to. This conference, I hope, brings us together to restore clarity about these things and to separate faith from propaganda and religious freedom from its abuse.
Wow, that's very powerful. I want to talk to something there for a minute. My dear friend, a spiritual father, Lubomir Hussar, I was with him when he was created cardinal in Rome, and I was able to serve at his mass. Spoke to me about the underground church, the real persecution, and how many times he was offered by the Russians, the Soviets, that if only he would cooperate, they could ease the restrictions. They could make his life in the churches more comfortable. Do you believe that there's this demand right now being made that Ukraine cede Donbass, even territory that's not occupied by Russians? I want to talk about it in terms of people, not territory. We're talking about millions of human beings being left behind the new Iron Curtain. Do you think they will be able to practice their faith freely without government influence and control, whether you're a Greek Catholic, a Ukrainian Greek Catholic, whether you're Orthodox, a Baptist, a Pentecostal, a Seventh-day Adventist? Is there going to be religious freedom in the occupied territories if that ceding of land happens, as is being pressed on Ukraine at the moment?
I think the answer is very clear, absolutely not. And we have so many proofs for it. And we don't have to go, we can go into a historical perspective, of hundreds of years ago, wherever the Russian boot would, present itself into Ukrainian territories. For example, Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church was forcibly liquidated and made to be part of the Russian Orthodox Church. But in very recent times, how about the religious freedom in Crimea? Crimea was under Russian occupation since 2014, and we see the model. We see what is going to happen, and we can actually multiply that what's happening in Crimea, where Tatars are completely oppressed, and only the state-controlled umas are permitted. Greek Catholics are completely forbidden and have been expelled from there. And if functioning or praying calmly and peacefully and hidden, and we have a lot of experience in that. So,
Father, let me clarify this. Are you telling me that in Russian-occupied Crimea, Ukrainian Greek Catholics are forbidden from functioning?
Yes, everywhere in Russian territory, including Russian Federation, there are millions of Ukrainians who are in Russian federations, since the Stalin's deportations. there is not even one Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church that was permitted to be registered. They gather, they pray, they meet at Roman Catholic churches. I know personally some Ukrainian priests who were going there as Roman Catholic priests, but to serve the Ukrainian Greek Catholic communities in a semi-underground situation. And this is happening in Crimea even more. And I think it will be multiplied, it will be made worse in the occupied territories if they fall into Russian hands. And the same fate goes for our Protestant brothers who are very numerous in those spaces. Our Greek Catholics are, we have very few parishes, but our Protestant brothers, it's just appalling what is happening to them and how many people are being actively killed, persecuted, and taken to court, prosecuted for being American spies. And this is happening right now.
So Protestants are basically treated as Western spies.
Spies, exactly.
So I think it's a good point you make, Father, that if we want to talk about religious freedom, we need only to look to Russia and what they've done in Crimea, what they're now doing in Donbass. And I think that, or I would hope that lawmakers on Capitol Hill on both sides of the aisle would start asking about those issues of religious freedom before they start listening to a lecture about religious persecution. And I want to thank you for bringing up our friends, Refrat Chubarov, Mustafa Zhemilev, the Crimean Tatars have now paid another high price for basically living on their ancestral homeland. They're the indigenous people of Crimea, and yet they're made not to be welcome. Their homes are confiscated, their houses of worship closed, and unfortunately, they've been subjected to murder and summary execution. Do you see, I want you to put your critical thinking cap on. Is there any truth to the idea that Ukraine is engaged in religious persecution by the law that restricts foreign governments from controlling churches in Ukraine?
Well, I think not. I think not, and the proofs for that is the very peaceful collaboration of the Council of Churches of Ukraine and their united front in everything. Basically, in all the issues and policies that they would analyze and present to our government. And often they're not listened to by our government, but still among our religious groups, there is a lot of collaboration and common goal, because we are living right now under threat of extinction, not only as churches, but as nation. And this really mobilized our efforts on every side, between the Protestants and the Orthodox and the Catholic, Roman Catholics, Greek Catholics, the Muslims, the Jews. I don't know where else in the world we can see such a united front of religious leaders, fighting the propaganda, the Russian propaganda that is bringing up this question of religious persecution. And it's enough to look at what happened everywhere where Russia is taking over, what happens to religious freedom. And, try to compare the Bucha that was mentioned here and those images that are burned into our minds from Bucha and other regions like that, and the places that we occupied in Russia, in Kursk. You see a very lively the difference between an occupier who tries to extinguish you and our military action that was leveraging giving us leverage in our communications and treatment of with Russian Federation. And so I don't think there is any persecution. I came to this country only a year ago. Before that, I lived and worked constantly in Ukraine. And of course, I'm a Greek Catholic, so my word might not count much. But I don't think there is any, and it's absolutely us trying to defend our national security questions rather than and you see that no theological question is being raised. No, it's not a religious question. It's a political question that is being brought and discussed right now in on the Hill.
Father, thank you. I appreciate your perspective. I want to go to a next guest, Dr. Yuri Felshinsky. I'd like to hear from you. Tell me about your experience. You're an author, a historian, a journalist. Very few people can say that they're experts in the way that you are about Russia and the former Soviet Union. I'm glad you're not on TV someplace else tonight so you can be with us. So please, give me your perspective.
Thank you very much for the invitation to participate in your event. I'm a historian and I was studying Russia and Soviet Union literally all my life. Religion by itself or church history by itself was not actually my specialty, but what was my specialty and what became my specialty as well is special service of the Soviet Union. And I have to tell you that we knew, of course, that Stalin used the Russian Church for political purposes, or for practical purposes, since approximately 1943. But then when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, some documents were released, and basically, to simplify it, according to those documents, the entire hierarchy of the Russian Church, well, the top level, of course, was recruited as agents of the NKVD or KGB, and some of them actually were officers of the state security. And since 91, when it seems to be that there was no political control from the Communist Party anymore, this was true, but indeed this was changed very quickly and very radically with the control of the FSB, of the new state security. And now we know and we see it that the Russian government is using the church as a tool to infiltrate, to influence, and to help the Russian state to take control of people, of countries, and of minds. And that's what it is now. So I agree that this is not a religious issue. This is a political issue. And when we see Putin in visiting Alaska and crossing himself several dozen times at the cemetery, this again is a political issue. It's not a religious one.
I want to talk to you about that because under the auspices of freedom of religion, something enshrined in the European Charter of Fundamental Rights, the UN Charter, in America, Thomas Jefferson's most cherished document wasn't the Declaration of Independence, which I believe is a masterpiece, but rather his Virginia Statute on religious freedom. Religious freedom is central to Western civilization. So the Russian Orthodox Church has become the soft-powered diplomats able to roam through the West where their diplomats would be unwelcome. They set up schools for what they call the near abroad, people who are of Russian ethnicity or have an interest in Russia. Do you see the Russian church acting as a church, or is it a hybrid church slash extension of the Russian state abroad? Give me your perspective.
Well, first of all, we have to remember that the Department of External Affairs of the Russian Orthodox Church was always very influential in acting as a agent for the state, for the Russian state, and this again, this unfortunately started even more actively after the collapse of the Soviet Union, when for many foreign religious leaders, it seems to be right. The communists was behind, and there was no problems in dealing with the Russian government anymore. And ironically, I remember Metropolitan Vitaly in Canada, talking about whom I met a couple of times before the collapse of the Soviet Union, talking about their opposition to the Soviet government and their use of the Russian Orthodox Church, because he knew that the Soviet government is using the Russian Orthodox Church for political purposes, right? But then after the collapse of the Soviet Union, they sincerely believe that the danger is gone, and that now the Russian Church has to be united. So it's both the using of Russian Orthodox Church and the Russian language, which we should not separate and forget, because in addition to the Russian Church and the entire activity of the Russian state using the Church as agents of influence, there is also Russian language, which is also used as a kind of agent of influence, and the creation of the Russian Foundation, which is supposed to be a cultural one, but indeed becomes a political one. This is the one which is established in like 89 countries, I believe. Maybe now it's less, of course, because of war, which was headed by Nikonov, who was grandson of Vyacheslav Molotov and the KGB officer himself. So this kind of thing, this unfortunately made this problem extremely difficult to deal with, because it's very difficult to go against the Russian language, for example, or a Russian cultural house where people supposed to meet to talk about culture, or places where people supposed to meet to talk about Russian religion. But unfortunately, in Russia, it's all connected very seriously to the state, and we cannot really, unfortunately, we cannot believe the sincerity of the Russian Church as the institution. This is definitely not so. We could believe in sincerity of some people who go there, but not to the Russian Church as the institution. The institution is used as a tool by the Russian government, and the government, of course, is controlled by the FSB.
There is ample evidence, and it's been published in Switzerland and affirmed by their security services, that Patriarch Kirill, the Patriarch of the Moscow, the Russian Orthodox Church, was himself a KGB agent when he was working at the World Council of Churches. There, in the state archives, you know better than I, there's evidence that nobody could be appointed a bishop without being passed by a committee of the KGB.
Again, correct.
So these people are still in control of the church today. Do you think when that generation passes, there is a chance for the Russian Orthodox Church to reform and free itself from that modality of power and authoritarianism of the past? Or do you think it's just so ingrained in the church today that it will be difficult for the church to actually be what we in the West would understand a church to be?
Well, I think the issue is not the church. The issue is that in Russia, well, for the first time in world's history, we have a situation when the state security is controlling the state. And it's not just controlling the state, it's also controlling everything what's, goes with the state, including the church. So it's not the church which was choosing to become in service of the state security which is not allowing people to proceed with the professional, let's call it, unless they agree to become agents of the FSB. So it's the church will be reformed, I'm sure, but as soon as the regime is changed. And we know that it's extremely difficult to change the regime which was established in Russia in 2000 when the FSB installed Putin, who was a former officer and director of the FSB as the president of Russia. And as we know, he is installed forever. We do not seriously believe that he voluntarily will step down, and a leader who is not connected to the FSB would replace him. I think this would be a naive look at the situation. So we're probably dealing with decades of the Russian Church, contemporary Russian Church, being under control of the FSB. As soon as they're gone, and I do not believe that this would happen very soon, everything will change. But for this, who knows? Russia has to be defeated in a war, and I'm afraid that the only way it's going to be defeated in a war, if we go through the Third World War, literally, the way Germany went through the Second World War. So it's going to be complicated, and I do not see any quick and easy resolution of this situation.
Well, Yuri, thank you for your insight. The historical perspective is invaluable. Lucy, I want to go to you now, if I can. You're a journalist, a broadcaster, an author. You've really kind of specialized in Russia. I believe that you headed up the BBC's Radio Moscow bureau for a while. I was particularly captivated by your book, The Baton and the Cross, Russia's Church from Pagans to Putin. It's a long history. I really am looking forward to hearing your perspective. Lucy, if you would.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me all right?
I can.
Great. Yeah, thanks very much for inviting me to talk. This is a very, very important panel, and I'm honored to be part of it. I wrote this book initially because I was involved in an investigation into domestic violence in Russia, and I was very surprised and completely horrified to see how hard the Russian Orthodox Church was lobbying against attempts to bring in restraining orders for violent partners, men who beat up their wives, girlfriends, family members. And Kirill himself lobbied very hard for this law to be dropped, and the lawmaker was basically hounded out of the country, out of the Duma. She now lives in California. But she said to me, in retrospect, it seems that I was naive to expect that such a law could be passed at a time when there were sort of preparations for the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and when violence was being reframed as a national virtue, when you see statues going up of Stalin and Ivan the Terrible, which when I first was in Moscow at the time that the Soviet Union fell apart, that would have been completely unthinkable with the, Memorial and all the sort of talk about coming to terms with the Stalinist past. That's all been thrown out the window. I think lots of people have talked about how ridiculous it is to sort of, complain that Zelensky's government is persecuting Christians. Had Marjorie Taylor Greene, who until quite recently was very close to President Trump, actually saying in Steve Bannon's war room that they were killing Christians. I mean, it's a completely grotesque distortion of the truth. And I just want to share with you very quickly one case which I know about in some detail, because I've got a BBC colleague who was making a film in Kherson with the cooperation of a very brave Ukrainian journalist who was there at the time. I just want to talk about this one priest who was in the film, Father Sergei Chudinovich, who had the Church of the Protection of the Holy Virgin, a parish which was in the city of Kherson. Quite soon after the Russian tanks rolled in, his church became a lifeline to the local community. People there could hear worship in Ukrainian, but it also was a distribution point for food and hard to get hold of medicines. There was even a hairdressing shop in there. And then it was sustaining the morale of many people in the city. And for this, the Russian forces came in and detained him. He was held in police custody for a while. When he came out, he was a kind of changed man. Nobody recognized him. He was very glum-faced, very irritable, just not at all like he was. And then he eventually managed to escape from the intergovernment-controlled Ukraine, and he could tell the story about what really happened to him when he was in captivity. And he said he remembered one of the men who was torturing him was called a varon, the word for crow in Russian. And he said, hasn't your Jesus managed to save you? And he said he was so thirsty he couldn't speak. He asked for water and they gave him alcohol. They beat me near my heart, strangled me with their hands. They forced me to my knees and tried to force a baton into my anus, right? Luckily, Chudinovich, has managed to recover in some extent, and he's now serving in a church in Irpin outside Kiev. But a fellow OCU priest was not as lucky, Stefan Podolchak, who had a bag put over his head and was killed. This is the kind of brutality that we're talking about. And I just feel it's worth bringing to people's attention what exactly the Russian forces are capable of when it comes to persecuting religious believers.
How do you, as a journalist, confront a society where at the highest echelons of government, a press secretary will talk about alternative facts? So when we hear people like Marjorie Taylor Greene talk about Christians being murdered by the Zelensky government, which has not happened, there's no evidence for it whatsoever.
No.
And yet we have these horrific episodes of torture that happen again and again to clergy, to women, to children. How do you, as a journalist, think it's possible to shape or reshape public opinion to accept the truth as opposed to the propaganda that the Russians have become so adept at?
Well, this is a question that's obsessing people everywhere because, at the beginning, when there were these crazy conversations between people in a basement in Kiev talking to their relatives in Russia, and they said, we're being bombed. And people in Russia said, I don't believe you. This is just propaganda from the neo-Nazis in Ukraine and stuff. It's now become, we're approaching the fourth year of this horrendous war, that it's very painful for a lot of people in Russia to kind of actually acknowledge what is being done in their name, what their troops are doing. Obviously, a lot of older people just watch Russian TV, but most people, under the age of 40 or under the age of 50, I would say, have VPNs. They actually have access to, they know what's going on, but they don't necessarily want to look in that direction because yeah, it's not something that people want to think about, what their government is doing, how many people are being killed in a war that doesn't really make any sense at all.
We're having a conversation about faith and freedom. You're a journalist. You've been in the region. You know Moscow. You know Ukraine. Does Ukraine ban access to news outlets around the world?
No, of course not. No.
Does Russia allow free access to news outlets around the world?
No, I mean, they don't have anything like the capacities of the Chinese to kind of like seal off, the internet. But I think some of that is coming. You know, there have been some apps you used to be able to access, you can't anymore. There's talk about YouTube being banned. It's something that is probably on the cards, I would say, and I feel that it's very, very alarming that people are so increasingly sort of isolated from the outside world, and that there's a kind of feeling that people that have left Russia because of their opposition to the war, including many clerics, that there's an attempt to stir up enmity. Oh, those are the elite that have gone abroad. They're not real Russians. They're not proper patriots. We don't care about them. There's an attempt to sort of other them, alienate them. They're not nashi. They're not part of us. And I find all this kind of attempts to sow division very powerful. I mean, they're very clever, and sometimes they're quite. They're done sort of with a sort of slash of humor and sarcasm, which appeals to people, but actually it's a very dark message, which is terrible for Russia, terrible for Ukraine, obviously. But
are you surprised it's taken hold in North America? That the culture war, you can almost tell from someone's political views what they believe the truth to be, not facts, but political views. Are you surprised that that's become so pervasive in North America?
Well, I was initially very surprised that, about this 180-degree turn that we were talking about at the beginning of this conversation, because, in the old days, the conservative, ultra-conservative, evangelical right was, thinking of Russia as the evil empire. And now I think that there's a kind of fascination with Putin as this kind of the way that he is seen as a sort of masculine, anti-woke figure who can kind of basically wield power. It appeals to some people in America, especially, I think. I made a whole program about this, looking at the growth of Orthodox converts in Texas. We don't really have time to go into that now, but I did find their total lack of empathy for what was happening to people in Ukraine very problematic.
So I think I want to encourage everybody to go look up that work. Lucy did yeoman's work on that. This projection of masculinity, overt masculinities, weightlifting clubs as a way to get people to join the club, the church. And yet when they leave the liturgy, you ask them about, do you believe in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist? Oh gosh, no. But I do believe in the weightlifting. I do believe in the cultural aspects. It's interesting how it's reshaping the American religious climate.
Yeah, I think to be fair, I mean, I think a lot of people in the pandemic were searching online for something. They were thinking about their own mortality, and orthodoxy seemed appealing to them. They felt some evangelical churches were just too commercial. One convert said to me, it's a bit like going to a Taylor Swift concert. They wanted something that they felt was more ancient and more rooted in history, But I think it is definitely a place for young men or any men that worried about their status and feel under threat, they can go there and they're told, women should be in the kitchen, kids should be homeschooled. We don't want to have anything to do with LGBT values. It's sort of reassuring to a lot of men who are kind of lost, I think. That's part of its popularity.
Interesting perspective. Lucy, keep up the good work. We'll talk to you again soon. Can we go to Sergey now? Sergey, are you still with us?
I'm here.
Great. People, I want to introduce you to Sergey Chapnin. Sergey used to work for the Moscow Patriarchate. He is now at Fordham University. His work as a scholar, as a speaker on the issues of Orthodox Christianity and its intersection of religion and politics in Russia and Eastern Europe, it's profound. I missed you by a couple hours in Constantinople over the Nicaea, but I'm glad to have you here. And I want to highlight this work, and I hope you'll speak to it. Your report, Religious Communities Under Pressure, Documenting Religious Persecution in Russia, 2022 to 2025. It's powerful. So I'll let you choose what you speak about, but I hope you'll tell us more about that. Sergey, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I think it's quite easy to be the last because lots of things were already said. So I will just give a few comments to general situation, and maybe I should start because the reason why we're together today and discussing these issues is this advocacy event in Washington, D.C. I think we should keep in mind what is the context here in the United States within the Orthodox churches, Orthodox jurisdictions that are here. The Assembly of Canonical Bishops last year, I believe fall 24, made a statement that this law, or this Ukrainian law, kind of August, September last year, is of great concern for all jurisdictions here in the United States. That's the official statement on the website of the Assembly of Bishops. That means that whatever the organizer is, could easily get support of all jurisdictions, not just our ROCOR or the OCA, but also Serbs, Greeks, literally everybody. Those who are a part of this Assembly of Canonical Bishops will join this initiative because there is an official document that raises the concern about the Ukrainian legislation. So this is one thing. And I believe that the kind of Ukrainian activists, those who support Ukraine, they, I think, in a way missed this opportunity last year kind of to bring their concerns to the Assembly of Bishops. I think this is of crucial importance. We have to, or kind of you have to talk to these guys and give them material. I should say that, of course, there's lots of kind of problems. For example, I had a private meeting with Metropolitan Nikolai, the primate of ROCOR, back in September 2022. He was just a few weeks, or he was elected 2 weeks before, I don't know, a few weeks before. And I said, look, we need a kind of firm statement condemning the war in Ukraine. Because, do you remember the history of ROCOR? I believe you do remember quite well. Back in 1930s, that was your church who supported Hitler. Well, there were reasons for that, of course. We know historical reasons, expecting that they will free Russia from Bolsheviks. Did that happen? And what's going on today? Could you kind of give the real assessment? I know that you are under Moscow Patriarchate, I know that you have kind of political problems kind of voicing your disagreement with Patriarch Kirill. But, well, that was September 22. You have quite some time. Do something. Just do something. Now it's more than 3 years since that. Nothing happened. Nothing. Last May, I initiated the campaign that during the All-American Council of the Church in America, there should be an event. Actually, originally the idea was to present my report on the religious persecution in Russia as a side event on the All-American Council of the Orthodox Church in America. They didn't allow me to do that. So okay, let's do a statement. Let's voice the support for the anti-war clergy in Russia. That's 100% in line what Orthodox Church in America was doing during the 20th century, supporting religious dissidents in the Soviet Union. Almost all of them, all the kind of great names of the OCA in the mid-20th century, like Metropolitan Leonti, Alexander Shmeman, John Meindorf, and others, Leonid Kishkovsky, they were all very firm supporting religious dissidents in the Soviet Union. So let's do the same. I mean, the situation is even worse now because well, there was a pressure on Orthodox clergy after the Second World War. We're not taking the period of persecutions, kind of Red Terror and Great Terror. But after the Second World War, there were kind of persecutions, but there were not kind of dozens of defrocked priests even in the Soviet Union for their kind of anti-war position. This is what we have now in Russia. Silence. They said, well, you know, for technical reasons, you're applied too late, and we have our policies and so on. Again, okay, no problem. That's the my proposal was rejected for technical reasons. That was June. In August, we have this meeting of our Archbishop of Alaska, Alexei, with Putin. And I told these guys in the chancery, on the OCA chancery, look, guys, I don't believe anymore. I can't believe that was a technical reason. That's a tendency. It's so clear that where are you? On what page are you? You're with Putin. Or at least you're so afraid of Putin that you cannot speak truth. You cannot witness to the truth. You cannot voice support for persecuted Christians in Russia. What had happened? No answers. I mean, until now. And I think the thing is that, well, the Russian Church will continue to exist. The Orthodox Church in America will continue to exist. ROCOR will continue to exist. So we have to talk to these people. We have to reach them out. We have to provide them with evidences about Ukraine, about occupied territories, about Russia. It's a huge work, and I think if we won't do that, no one will do that.
You know, Sergey, I want to parse that. The idea that we need to talk is absolutely right. It is the Christian way, dialogue. And yet in 2016, there was going to be a dialogue about the future of Ukraine, and Russia didn't show up. Metropolitan Onofri from Ukraine didn't show up. The breaking of communion with the Ecumenical Patriarchate, the now division of orthodoxy, or the fragmentation of it, even if it isn't entirely breached, is difficult. The truth takes two things: someone to tell it and someone to hear it. Do you think there are people that are or have been following Putin that are ready to listen to a different narrative?
Yes. I think one of the greatest mistakes that we're doing now is kind of thinking that Russian Orthodox Church is the monolith. No, it's not a single agent. There are different groups there. Of course, we see the institutional church, that has access to all kind of state-owned and state-controlled media in Russia. And of course, we hear this voice. But we have another actors also. We have activists. I mean, of course, sorry to say, among these activists, we have nationalists who support the war in Ukraine, no doubt. But at the same time, we have anti-war clergy and lay people. We have the silenced majority of the church. And you know quite well that since kind of the Soviet tradition is that you can be silent, you can keep silence in favor of something, and you can be silent because you're against of something. And like Yuri Filtyshinsky said, the worst thing one can imagine about Russia is that secret services, the FSB, is controlling literally everything in the country, literally everything. If there will be a small group of, I don't know, a community, a parish of the kind of publicly or even semi-publicly anti-war Christians, they will be persecuted within days, just days. So we have this our kind of religious Christian underground as it was back in the middle of the 20th century. And I think we have to take seriously this underground. They have no voice. Of course, they are afraid, but they do exist, and I do have some contacts with them, and that's not just the theory. That's my practical experience. Still keeping communication with these people.
Sergey, I hear you talking about the church isn't a monolith, and there are people that are willing to hear that silent majority. And it's a powerful idea. But yet I see that the person who celebrated the funeral for Alexei Navalny was punished. A priest who refuses to recite the Holy Roost prayer is punished. Children who write anti-war children's pictures, their parents get punished. Can we really change things knowing that the church is in such a superior, powerful position with the support of the state? What are your views?
Well, my hope is that we do have our anti-war clergy in our Western Europe and in the United States, and Christian activists. You know, we have the Peace Unto All Foundation that supports this persecuted clergy and their families, and they are based now in Germany, and they are undesired organization are now kind of, by the way, could you imagine? Peace Unto All is undesired. So that's what we have. I think this group that is, of course, small but quite active. It is involved with projects of Russian opposition in Europe. It has contacts with both our Ukrainian Orthodox Church and Orthodox Church in Ukraine, our clergy. This contacts. I couldn't say that they're active, but they do have contacts, at least. And I think something could be done, because if this group will not prepare, well, at least the vision, how changes could happen, say, in the nearest future, then no one can prepare kind of any program or kind of will be ready to do any practical steps when that will be possible. So the situation is bad, but we do have some hope.
I want to go back to your idea that your ideas were excluded for process reasons, technical reasons. I know these ROCOR bishops. I've met many of them over the years. They have their own eyes. They can see what happened in Izium. They can see what happened in Bucha. They can see the Skripals being targeted for assassination. They see that dissidents in Moscow, or people who fall out of favor, fall out of windows. why do you think there's still a tendency to remain silent? And I go back to my youth and Martin Luther King, who says it's not our enemies that we have to worry about, I'm paraphrasing, but rather the silence of our friends who stood by, witnessed, and did nothing. Do you think there's a capacity for such people to change their ways and be open to the idea of confronting evil when they find it without destroying orthodoxy? I can't think of a sane person who wants to destroy orthodoxy, but they do want accountability. They do want humanity. They do want the authentic message of Christ, who talked about love and forgiveness and compassion and turning swords into plowshares. Do you think that people who have so far closed their eyes to the evil and remain silent are open to transformation?
You're absolutely right. This is the question of good and evil. So that's basically the moral question. And the problem with the Orthodox Church today, I wouldn't say that this is just the problem of the Russian Orthodox Church or Russian diaspora, whatever, is that the Orthodox Church is lacking moral stand. I don't know why, but that's the greatest challenge for the Orthodox Christians: how we can bring back our morality. I don't have the answer, but I mean, if we will do nothing or just kind of think about it, contemplate about it, nothing will happen. We have to try. We have to do it again and again. We have to put pressure on bishops, on the holy synods, on the clergy. That's the only way. If our Christian activists, lay people, won't be active, if they will just stay wherever in being happy with the rituals, rich or liturgical tradition, hymns, theology, ascetic traditions, nothing will happen. I mean, the crisis is in a different place.
Sergey, one of the things I appreciate is that you admit that you don't have the answer, but you are asking the right question.
Absolutely.
And I have to tell you that is the basis for us moving forward.
If you have a question, feel free to either raise your hand with the function on Zoom or just unmute yourself, and you should be able to do so.
I also want to add, you can also type in your question in the Q&A and we will read it if you don't want to speak.
We've gone long. I want to go around and give the journalists an opportunity to ask their questions. Panelists, please stay with me for a few minutes. Sergey, while people are putting their questions together, I would observe that when I was doing the research for our latest book, we would tend to find people that would devolve into conversations about canonicity and jurisdictions. The idea of moral behavior, ethical conduct was almost uniformly absent from the conversations, and that was discouraging to me.
Totally agree, and that's our. I think we lost we lost the kind of general feeling that this dimension is present in religious life. So it goes so deep. I mean, these problems go so deep. So maybe there will be no answer for the next few years. But if, as a church, as a community, we plan to survive, then we have to address these questions.
And I think not only to survive, but be relevant. A church that can't proclaim the gospel becomes irrelevant very quickly. It becomes increasingly important to a decreasing number of people. And I would hate to see that happen. Do we have any questions yet?
Well, I'm a freelance journalist. I write for the Kyiv Post. I've written a number of articles about this religious persecution, false religious persecution claims by the ROC and some of the lobbyists in Washington, D.C. I wanted to just briefly change gears here just a little bit and follow up on the money trail. because the money trail is very important here. And according to Stephen Moore is with the Ukraine Freedom Project, and I've got a lot of respect for him. And he's basically suggested or claims that there's a Russian oligarch by the name of Vadim Novinsky. And the Vadim Novinsky has a client called Amsterdam and Partners LLC. They have a team of lobbyists in Washington, D.C. that's been promoting these false narratives that Ukraine is persecuting the Russian Orthodox Church / UOC, Ukrainian Orthodox Church. In 2024, just while Congress was trying to debate this $61 billion aid package for Ukraine, this Amsterdam LLC had a team of lobbyists that spent $100,000 lobbying for religious freedom, but they're not declaring the fact that they're a foreign agent, because there's an exemption under the Lobbying Disclosure Act / Foreign Agents Registration Act. Is an exemption for religious purposes. This is a really serious issue because this $61 billion aid package was in fact stalled in Congress. My understanding is because the Republican far right, a good portion, was infected with this false propaganda that Ukraine was persecuting Christians. So I guess I don't know if this is a question or not, but I'm thinking that, my God, $100,000 was spent on lobbying, and the return on investment would have been a minus $61 billion for Ukraine and a $61 billion plus for Russia. And if this isn't corruption, my gosh, the word doesn't have any meaning. So I just want to bring some focus on the money trail here, because Vadim Novinsky, he is connected to the Kremlin. He was a former member of the Ukrainian parliament, and his client, Amsterdam LLC, has been doing a lot of nefarious activities here. So I just wanted to bring this up, the money trail aspect of this.
I thank you for the statement. I think that you're right. There is a loophole. They don't have to register as foreign agents. Their law firm in London, their website they don't try to hide who they represent. But again, I think it's important that congressmen know who's funding the people before them. And you're right, there is a great return on the investment, and that's why we're seeing the religious do it now. Victor, do you want to say anything to that?
To make a broader observation, if I may, Doctor, that would encompass that issue and a lot of other ones, if I may. And that's the following. Somebody somewhere much more smart than I am said that good judgment comes from experience. Experience comes from bad judgment. And if you look at how the West and the United States in particular has dealt with the Soviet Union, with Russia, and not just on this issue of religion, but where we are now compared to, for example, where we were in 1991, that is a huge change, and the direction right now is pitiful. My point is this: when we talk about experience, we somehow look for experience in the areas of computer repair, brain surgery, and playing golf. When it comes to these issues that we've been talking now for 2 hours? And for all of the analogs, everything, every ancillary issue, every central issue in the war, Russia's war against Ukraine, and in fact, the war against the West. The experience of a lot of the people that have spoken today, the experience of those who have lived the reality, is and has been almost uniformly ignored. This is one area of human endeavor where historically the people, victims have very, very clear vision. And these people, these nations that have had to deal with Russia, their experience has been denied, dismissed, ridiculed. After World War II, we had Operation Keelhaul with British and American troops engaged in a safari against refugees from the Soviet Union and shipped them back by force because they didn't like the message. And if you look up the definition of keelhaul, that tells you everything you have to know about the attitude that the West, that London and Washington had against these people. And we're not going to move the needle if we don't start seeking out and listening to the experience and to a lot of what has been said here in the last 2 days, the last 2 hours. And it has been difficult for everybody who's engaged in this great campaign, as I call it. But there's no alternative other than to continue beating the drum and to bring these points to, our fellow citizens, legislators on the Hill, and everything else. It is a phenomenon of a human failure that in this area, as I say, we just don't care about that experience. We've trashed it.
Let's hope that there are sober Americans who feel otherwise.
Add one thing just that about Vadim Novinsky. I think it's quite important that he is not just a Ukrainian oligarch, kind of pro-Moscow Ukrainian oligarch, but he is also a deacon of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. So it's a very kind of specific thing for Ukraine when local kind of oligarchs or kind of sponsors of the church are kind of were ordained. And I would say not just one or two of them, but just quite a few. That is why they have direct access to Metropolitan Onufry, and actually, of course, could influence the major decisions of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. I believe that within Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and I prefer not to call it Moscow Patriarchate as they did themselves. So just let's respect the the self-understanding of the organization. So it's quite important, I think. So
let me interject here for a second. Can you repeat what you just said? What's the point? I don't understand. Are you saying that the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which in fact is the moniker, but it's not a Ukrainian Orthodox Church. We know where it came from, correct? We know.
Well, first of all, Ukrainian Orthodox Church is the official title, without Moscow Patriarchate, of this church, I believe, for at least 20 years. And there was a period, quite a long period, I would say 10, 20 years, when the Ukrainian Orthodox Church was accepted largely by the society as is, without this additional words, Moscow Patriarchate. It started to appear only after the annexation of Crimea. The second point, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church consists of bishops, priests, monastics, and lay people who are citizens of Ukraine. They're not citizens of Russia. So this is 100% Ukrainian church. And again, that's just the fact. We have to accept it. Of course, there are those who support Ruski Mir narratives and so on and cooperate with FSB. But this is their personal responsibility. This is not the problem of the whole organization with, as you said, some time ago had 12,000 parishes. So if the state will treat this organization as a religious organization, and traitors and all these guys who should be under arrest or whatever as individuals who violate Ukrainian laws, I think that will be correct.
Father Yuri, are you with us?
Yes, I am. And so thank you for organizing this and for bringing us together and for hearing all these different sides and supplementing ourselves with all these ideas and thoughts. I still think that, in the law that was passed a few years ago, that forbids activity of any institution that has its center in Russia, in the country that is the aggressor, and especially having the very long and extensive and proven by many facts history of trying to influence political entities through the church. That law is justified, I think, because it doesn't go after a church as church, but it goes after the activity of that church, being anti-Ukrainian, and the country has all the right to do that. It happens everywhere in the world, in this country as well. Maybe not in religious questions, but because there is a real separation between the church and the state in this country. But I still think that the Russian Orthodox Church, or I should say Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate in Ukraine, in too many cases has proven itself to be an outpost of Russian propaganda and ideologically, and of the KGB as tool of influence. And thus, I do support that ruling, and I think that, because I also know of other churches, the Protestant churches that had their center in Moscow, and since this law came into action, they changed their affiliation, or they broke their ties with Moscow, and thus I don't see that as a persecution of religion, but or religious freedom, but of activity that is very distinctly anti-Ukrainian.
It's interesting you say that, Father. I was thinking about, have you seen the play Hamilton, the musical?
No, unfortunately. I see.
There is a priest named Samuel Seabury who pops up in the play. He's largely been forgotten in current American history. Samuel Seabury wrote a series of letters called Letters from a Connecticut Farmer. He was using a pseudonym and basically attacking American freedom and saying that they were ungrateful for not listening to the king, who is the head of the Church of England. The American system and history was to exclude the Church of England simply because it was run as a foreign agency for a foreign power. It established the Episcopal Church and said, we won't get involved with your theology, your rites of worship. Those are your own. But you must not obey a foreign power. And today, the Episcopal Church and the Church of England are in communion with each other. As you know, through history, we work things out. Maybe not today, but in God's time. So there is good testament. But as Sergei raises, there's always been a tension between corporate restriction and individual accountability. And I think that's something well worth considering. We've run late. I wish I could get to all the other guests. I can't. I don't see that there are any further questions. So I'd like to thank you all for participating. I'd like to thank our audience. And I'd like to thank Roxolana, Eric, and all the rest of you who put this together. I'm only the moderator tonight. You did the hard work. I thank you for it. And let's hope it makes a difference. Roxolana, can you close the session?
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. O'Hurley. We really, really are honored to have you, first of all, as our advisor. You did help advise us throughout this whole process. You gave us this wonderful idea of holding a press conference. We chose a virtual one because it was last minute and also a great way to connect people from different countries, different parts of the United States. Dear honored and distinguished guests, thank you so much for responding to my last minute requests, and for everyone here who helped get you, Mr. Lacey, Pan Orest, Yelena, Maria Panga, anyone else, Marina Lvoska, anyone who helped us invite guests from our panelists and from our fellow activists. Thank you for taking the time to do that to help me as the initiator and one of the main organizers. I really appreciate each and every one of you. We will be following up with all of you. Same with our guests. If you do have any questions, we put our email in the chat. Please do email us, Ukraine Advocacy Task Force of DC at gmail.com, and we'll be happy to connect you with any of our wonderful experts, including our incredible moderator. If you do have follow-up questions, or if you want to do a separate interview with them after this or get a recording of this, please let us know. This meeting is being recorded. We will edit it, and then we will be sharing it with the public. We were trying to make sure that everyone had a chance to speak. We still do have a video from Father Cyril Hovaron. Dr. Hurley, I'm not sure if you want to show it now, or should we send it to our guest?
I would love to show it now. Cyril is a very insightful theologian, a good man. I'd like to show that video now. And as Roxolana said, we will follow up with you. There'll be information. There are several articles people have published, books that we've published. We're not flogging them so you buy them, but we hope it empowers you to make reasoned and good articles. So if we could close out by seeing the video from Cyril Hovren, I would really appreciate it.
And also, I just want to make one little note. Eric will put in the chat our website. He was kind enough to make a website for us for this event. We will be adding resources for all of our experts here. So each of our dear distinguished panelists, if you still have articles or books you would like to share as resources that we can put on the website so that our guests and journalists have access to them, please let us know. We're going to put our website link into the chat shortly so you can check it out, stay in touch with us. And I just want to say that Father Cyril Hovaron was here. Unfortunately, he's in Kiev, Ukraine, and he had to leave because of the curfew, and it started, as you know, Russians started attacking Ukraine, and so the air raids started going off, so he had to unfortunately step off, but that's why we asked him to do a video in case of this kind of emergency. So thank you for your understanding, and thank you again for being with us. We appreciate it.
As the war in Ukraine continues and gets even worse, so the problems that stem from the war also continue and are getting worse. One of them is the problem of how religion is used by the aggressor in order to wage its war against Ukraine. Religion is used as a soft power, and it complicates the internal situation in Ukraine, the situation related to the framework of human rights, of religious freedom, etc. Not just Ukraine, but many other countries with a significant presence of the Russian Orthodox Church face a similar problem, like the Baltic countries, the Nordic countries, etc. Everywhere Russia tries to use religion as its instrument, weaponizes religion, and when the government tries to tackle this problem, to contain this influence, Russia immediately accuses those countries of violation of human rights and religious freedom. Every country, including Ukraine and primarily Ukraine, face the same difficult dilemma: how to navigate between the imperative of human rights and the imperative of national security. No one has found an optimal solution to this problem. We are still in the process of seeking the solution, and we rely in Ukraine on the help of our partners. Indeed, as I said, there are problems. the problems continue. But there are two approaches, basic approaches from our partners and other countries to these problems, and two different approaches how to help Ukraine to deal with those problems. One is what I would call constructive criticism. Another one is non-constructive, damaging criticism. The former one comes from our partners, our friends. It's a friendly criticism that tries to help Ukraine to overcome the issue of this kind of dilemma that I've indicated earlier. They understand the difficulty in which Ukraine is. They understand the multiplicity of challenges it faces, and tries to help us to find a solution. Another approach is very similar to the one exercised by Russia, when other countries, other sides, use the problems that we face as an opportunity to aggravate our situation, to make our positions even more difficult, and eventually to break us. Sometimes the arguments, the problems that both sides, both attitudes indicate, even the words they use, even the arguments they bring, they look similar, but there is this fundamental difference between the two attitudes. One attitude tries to help us, another one tries to break us, to damage us. So we need to be really wise and capable of discerning between the two attitudes, which one comes from whom, from the friends or from the foes, from those who want to help or those who want to damage. Also, those who observe this problem, who is concerned about the problems of religious freedom in Ukraine, they also need to decide which attitude they apply. Do they help or do they damage? Do they play on the Ukrainian side, or do they side willingly or unwillingly with the Russian side? So this is the dilemma that everyone who tries to deal with the issues of religious freedom in Ukraine needs to resolve for him or herself. So which side are you at? What do you help to achieve? How do you help to achieve? Those questions everyone has to ask him or herself in order to help Ukraine.
As you can see, that was a very powerful video from one of our distinguished guests. Unfortunately, he couldn't be with us live, so we're grateful to him for recording his statement. So we want to take the time to thank you all again for being with us. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for everything all of you do to help and support Ukraine, to keep fighting the good fight for supporting human rights, democracy, and freedom in the United States, in Ukraine, and in the rest of the world. Together, we will keep fighting against tyranny, disinformation, and be on the right side of history. Thank you to all my activists, friends, colleagues that were here to help in every single way that you helped me be able to do this event. I couldn't have done it alone. It takes a village. And of course, thank you again to our two advisors, Dr. Michael O'Hurley and Pastor Roman Kapran, who helped advise us at this short notice to put together such an incredible event at really last minute, if you can think, because we found out about this event fairly recently. So thank you so much to all of you for being with us, taking the time out of your busy schedules. We really appreciate you. As we say, together to victory, glory to Ukraine, glory to its heroes. Slava Ukraini, Heroyam Slava. Eric just put the website in if you want to take a quick look, but we will be following up with each and every one of you to send you more information, how you can follow up on this event with the incredible panelists who are with us. And with any journalists who have questions, feel free to also reach out to me to follow up as well with any of the panelists if you think of anything after this event. Thank you all so much. Take care, and all the best to you.